Scream 5 is now out in theaters, and most of the reviews that are coming out for this movie are mostly positive. So today we're going to go ahead and look at the opposite side and see why they think that this movie is not necessarily a good film. On the tomato meter, it already has a 78% and there are 65 reviews available. The audience score is not necessarily there, but for the critics' consensus, it says the fifth Scream finds the franchise working harder than ever to maintain its meta edge and succeeding surprisingly often. As for how many rotten reviews, there are only 14 of them. And just to let you guys know about how the system works, I'm only going to be looking at the brief summaries that are only shown on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm not really going to look inside of the websites and look a lot more in depth on their analysis on the film. And there is a possible chance that I'm probably not going to read every single rotten review that's on here, mostly because some of the reviews that are on here would say the same thing as the other critics would usually say. Also, a disclaimer, at this time right now, I have not seen the movie yet, so at this portion of the video, you're going to see me just having like my first reaction to just the criticisms without seeing the movie yet. But afterwards, halfway through the video, when I probably read some more, I will be able to see the film and then see if I can be able to understand some of the criticisms that they have. But with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started reading some of these reviews. It's neither fan service nor anti-fan service. Just as it's not quite a sequel and not quite a reboot. Whatever it is, it's not much of a movie. The Ghostface killer returns in a self-deprecating fan service buffet that's woefully short on scares. Scream's 25th anniversary relaunch will have audiences laughing out loud as opposed to cowering in terror. It pretends that being grossly unoriginal and extremely repetitive is some purposeful, clever decision, but winds up only being grossly unoriginal and extremely repetitive. This clever, heavily meta picture has fun both mocking its own existence and trying to find enough twists to justify itself, but the film is ultimately undone by the contortions necessary to keep the irrelevant sleight of hand going. When you go to the same fun house 5 times, you begin to see the cracks in the Hall of Mirrors. Okay, so there's a few things I want to say here with some of the reviews that I have seen. One, I'm not sure what they're talking about when they're saying fan service. I guess in the sense of fan service when they're talking about Ghostface and how dangerous the killer is and how exciting that can be. Well, yeah, with that being played up, I don't see anything wrong with that, because in a horror film that has an iconic character like this, you would want to see them act intimidating and ramp up the audience where they would either get excited or have some thrills when they feel intensifyingly scared by this character. Now, as for saying that this movie is not really original and it's repetitive, and saying that, well, just because it's being self-aware of it, it doesn't mean that it's doing any better, it's just acting these things out. I kind of get that understanding when I watched Scream 2, but I didn't really get it that much when I saw Scream 3 and 4, and even the first one, because they all play themselves up, and it's about good timing and good writing, while the movie being self-aware on it being a spoof film, while also acting out how the spoof film is going about, while also creating some things in here that's good for commentary and pretty scary. As for the film lingering along and it's just people trying to figure out who the killer is, and then you see them doing the exact tropes as they are going along, I have experienced that, especially with Scream 2. But if the movie does have good commentary and good comedy and good moments with Ghostface, then I would think that this movie could actually do its job very well. But of course, I haven't necessarily seen the movie yet, so I don't know if that's exactly what happened. There's an appealing return to brutality to the series, and it's nice to see some old faces, but Scream is the same old Scream. I guess it's the same thing as saying, like, it's not that original or it doesn't really have anything new. So that could be a worry, but that's kind of the same thing that some people would usually say about the Scream franchise, and saying, like, oh, it's not necessarily that interesting. But we'll probably see once I've actually watched the movie. There is not a single surprising element in Scream, and that's a sincere portrayal of whatever legacy belongs to this franchise. It's more of a gasp than a scream, desperately in need of some fresh air. The now venerable Scream horror franchise has lived long enough to become the villain. Some of these are a little harsh. It's impossible not to appreciate the guess the killer game that remains the franchise's central and now only draw, but it's crushingly overfamiliar and sadly fright-free. Seriously overindulges in self-referential cleverness to the point of undermining the actual scare factor. It gets almost too meta to function. Over 2 hours, Cinco de Screamo lumbers along with routine kills and few surprises even when it makes lame attempts at shocking us. Each time the new Scream makes an observation about derivative sequels, it's already committed 2 of those sins itself. So the last few criticisms that I'm seeing on here is this movie isn't really scary and it's focusing too much on the references to cliche horror films. To be honest, if it does do that, I'm not really gonna be that offended by it because that is what makes the very first Scream movie a pure classic. If you're not necessarily scared by it, you can appreciate it for being that clever on being a spoof film while also playing into that spoof film and having a twist ending that matches up with the entirety of the film. So if there are people in here that would want to expect a scary film, maybe that's something that they're not going to expect. But if they do like to focus on the funny aspects of it, then the movie can probably do its job all fine and good. Okay, so this section of this video kind of ended quicker than I thought, but some of them were repeating themselves a little bit when I was starting to read some of these reviews. So far what I'm seeing is that some people are saying that it's not scary, it's putting in too much references, some of it is like lingering on a little bit in the fan service stuff. But I'm gonna go ahead and see the movie, and then once I come back and then continue on with the rest of this video, I'll see if I actually agree with the critics or disagree with them and see if this movie is more on the positive note or I will agree with them and it's more on the negative side. But either way, my review of this is gonna be a little fascinating. So with that being said, here I go. I'm gonna see the movie, and this will be my thoughts right now. So I just got back from the theaters and saw Scream 5, and yeah, I don't really agree with what the critics are saying. I do actually like this movie. I do get what they're talking about, though. There are some things in here where they're relying on jump scares, and some of them are pretty lame. Sometimes it does linger on a little bit. There is a sense of drag in here. I think one thing that I didn't notice that wasn't necessarily criticized that much was the way that the dialogue is handled, but the acting in here is really good, and these actors are doing the best that they can to play off of the script that they do have. When they're trying to do like serious dramatic moments, it's like, I should feel something, but the way that these characters are talking, I don't buy it. But with the performances in here, these actors are doing whatever they can to pull off this screenplay, but when it comes to the comedy, it really does sell it. I think that it works for the type of movie that it's going for in terms of being a spoof film, in terms of like making fun of other cliche horror movies or even updated horror films now. It's self-referencing those type of films. It's so relevant to this very day, and it's like perfect timing to go ahead and bring this franchise back and doing more references into that type of genre and updating them. I feel like it could have updated a little more and could be even funnier, but again, it probably would have distanced itself from terms of the other sequels because it would have wanted to be a little more in link with what the movies are doing and not necessarily be like that sporadic and that off base, and maybe they would have wanted some suspense since it is kind of a horror film. And also, I do have a problem with the twist because I don't buy the twist at the end of Scream 4. At least with Scream 4, there is somewhat of a story that they're talking about and it makes sense. With this one, it's like the message is there, but in terms of who the killers are, you could have made them like somebody else that would have been more believable. But anyway, let's go ahead and look at some more negative reviews and see if anybody else has something to say about the film that they didn't really care for. Okay, so now it's at a 77% and it's at 115 reviews. And as for rotten reviews, there are now 27 rotten reviews. So that means there's at least 13 more brand new negative reviews, so let's see what they would have to say. Tries to be both a remake and sequel, as well as obviously a reboot, and the combination proves to be pretty unstable, often veering into dopiness, grossness, or tedium. Like many better than average renditions of exhausted franchises, the main takeaway from Scream is the wish that its directors were making an original film rather than recycling an old one to the best of their abilities. Scream takes some risk, some of which are truly daring, its head spinning then that it could still come off as so unceremonious throughout. This new Scream leaves the franchise spinning in a void. It's metastatic. The whole affair feels by the numbers, and the self-awareness makes the mediocrity more and not less obvious. Okay, so now I understand when people are talking about like, oh, it's being fan service but not being fan service at the exact same time, and it's trying to do like different types of films. I think what they're saying here is that this movie doesn't really have much of an identity. I personally find that to be an odd criticism because the Scream franchise is usually like that. It is that weird. It is pretty much being a spoof film while also falling into that trap of being a spoof film, but also doing unique ways of not really being a spoof film and at the exact same time being a spoof film. And I feel like that with this one, it does the exact same thing. Some of it is a little hard to believe, but some way around it, you can find ways of appreciating for what it is trying to do, rather than criticizing it and saying like, oh, you should have done a better job than that. This Scream feels like a movie than a podcast about a movie, one hosted by a clack of irritating smarty pants commenters who don't know how or when to shut up. Okay, some of the characters in here I don't like. Some of them, at least the main actress in here, I will admit her acting sometimes goes on and off. Sometimes she's pretty good, sometimes it feels like it's a little deadpan. And then there are other characters in here that just feel dislikable and they don't have a likable presence. And that's kind of an ongoing thing when you look at horror films. They just have characters in here that act like jerks and you just don't like them. And then again, the ones that actually are being funny and the ones that I do enjoy seeing their presence on screen, I enjoy them very much. So I don't think that all of the characters in here are that bad. Scream is a movie you want to like out of sentiment, but Wes Craven knew how to make the laughs land and the shock shock. And the replacement directors don't. I disagree with that strongly. I think that this person actually did do a pretty good job in honoring Wes Craven, as a matter of fact. The movie equivalent of a lesser Ice 9 Kills track. Not much depth outside of, remember this horror movie, and some slick riffs, but the enthusiasm, the material is genuine, and they can definitely play the instruments. And that was it. That's where all of the negative reviews in here. Some I understood, some I didn't get at all. I thought that the movie was pretty funny. In terms of scares, yeah, I do agree it wasn't really that scary. Actually, I take that back. There was something at the end that was pretty disturbing and in some retrospect is pretty scary. I guess in terms of the message that they're talking about for the movie, yeah, that is scary in of itself. But with what they did in terms of one character arc, at least at the very end, that I didn't necessarily see coming, it's pretty disturbing. So in terms of that, I can give the movie a little bit of credit. There is some disturbing elements that the film went into, and it does talk about it with interesting commentary, but it's more so on the comedic aspect than it is on the dramatic stuff. So I enjoyed it for the comedy, which is the thing that I usually enjoy with this franchise in general. So yeah, I still find this to be a win-win situation. But anyways, what did you guys think of Scream 5? Did you enjoy the film, or do you agree with the critics and you didn't like it? Or do you have something different than what these critics have said when you did dislike the movie? Put your thoughts down in the comment section below and let's have a conversation about it. And like this video if you agree with what I say, or dislike this video if you disagree with what I say. I don't mind the dislikes. So that is it I have for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be sure to see you in the next video.